Welcome to Criminal Law Unfiltered.
Welcome to Criminal Law Unfiltered with Robert M. Helfend. Robert is the founder of Helfend Law Group and has more than 4 decades of experience defending clients in California and nationwide. He's handled thousands of cases, including some of the toughest federal and state charges. I'm Leanne Lyon, and in this episode, we're looking at evidence and defense strategies in sex crime cases, how false allegations are handled, and what long-term consequences these cases can carry. Robert, this is a heavy topic, and this is part 2. In sex crime cases, what kind of evidence is usually the most important?
Well, you have to evaluate the victim's story first. That's important. It's treat it like any other case. And you're trying to see about the inconsistencies in the victim's case or the victim's allegations. For instance, I had one case where the child victim said that she was repeatedly sexually assaulted by my client. And in one of her statements, she had said that, he would come in the room and he would tie me to the bedposts. And so we were able to find some cleaning people, the cleaning woman who'd come in, and she would actually take care of the house every day. And she was able to come in and testify that he didn't have any bedposts. There were no bedposts in his house. So it was impossible for her to have been tied up to a bedpost. So when you get fortunate like that to be able to show their allegations are not true, that's fortunate. That is a very fortunate fact. Unfortunate for her that she had said that. Right. And the guy was not convicted. So, you just have to evaluate the evidence and then see if you can disprove some of the allegations that the victim is saying. That's probably the starting point.
Well, other evidence I think we've talked about are things like DNA, text messages, digital evidence. How does the defense challenge things like that?
It all depends on the case. So I have another one of these types of cases where there's DNA evidence of my client on the outside of the victim's clothes. But you have to evaluate the chain of custody.
Yeah.
And the chain of custody, what I mean is, how did law enforcement get in contact with those clothes? And it turned out that the victim's mother went home and grabbed the victim's clothes and put them all in one bag and then took it to police. The police are not the ones who said to the victim, here, listen, go into another room there, change your clothes, and then let me have those clothes. And they are the ones who handled the clothes with, gloves and put them in the bag and then sealed the bag and then brought that and booked it into evidence. So it's really important to evaluate the chain of custody in a DNA case because, DNA can be a devastating piece of evidence against your client. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to rebut a DNA evidence that, that's not my client's DNA. So you have to go to the beginning and evaluate, like I said, how did police gather these items of clothing? Or, whatever items they are, but how did they gather those items?
And in those cases, I mean, there's cases where you're defending somebody who is guilty, but there's cases where you clearly are defending somebody who is not guilty. And when those accusations turn out to be false, what happens in those cases?
Well, first of all, you said that in those cases, I defend people who are guilty. I've never done that.
That's true.
I don't defend people who are
That's true.
guilty. I defend
Excellent.
people who are falsely accused.
Falsely accused.
And
Indeed.
you know, one thing that people need to understand, and especially in these types of cases, is that this is, when you get to court and you get a trial, a jury trial, it's not about the truth. It's about the evidence. You're dealing with evidence. And that is completely different than the truth. And especially in a sex case, because people will bend the truth to make their point. And especially if it's a child and the mother always bends the truth. That's typically what happens in a sex case. They are false. It's your job to try to find out whether or not, or figure out a way to show a jury that they're false. The problem with sex cases is that you're rarely able to settle them short of a jury trial. In a homicide, once you find weaknesses in the case, because it's a mental state. Why did the person kill this other person? So it's a mental state. So many times you can have the murder charge dismissed or lowered to a different charge, like a voluntary manslaughter or something. In a sex case, there really is no agreeable position that you can lower the charge, because every charge requires sex registration. And if your client says, I didn't do it, where are you going to go with this? And so it's difficult to settle these cases. And so if it's a false allegation, it's a difficult position for the prosecution and for the defense. The prosecution cannot dismiss this case because they have a victim that's saying, I was assaulted, I was violated, I want my day in court. And so that's their client. And so that client, if you can't really dismiss the case, because the client's going to go to the newspapers or the internet and say, this DA's office is soft on crime. I told them, Mr. X did this to me. And so you're in a no-win situation on a sex case. You're either going to end up agreeing to register, or you're going to trial. Now, sometimes it could be that, you could face a life sentence in a case like this, and maybe they're offering you a number that you could live with. And, I'd rather take that than risk a life sentence. And so then what the issue becomes is how to if your client decides, I want to settle my case. Mm-hmm. And that's their decision, not mine. I tell them the pros and cons and what can happen and what's probably likely to happen, but you never know what's going to happen in a jury trial. Right. Never know. And if the client decides they want to settle, what you're trying to do, at least in the state of California, is get them to be a tier 1 registrant. At a tier 1 registrant, that means that you have to register for 10 years. And then after 10 years, you can petition the California DOJ. Well, first you petition the court where you live. at that time, get them to agree to remove you, and then you send your court order to the California DOJ, and then you don't have to register. At worst, you want to become, you can be a tier 3 registrant, which means a lifetime registration, but you need to make sure that that offense that you're pleading to can be reduced to a misdemeanor. If it can be reduced to a misdemeanor, then at the end of your probation, you have your attorney file motions to reduce it to a misdemeanor. Then, once that happens, you have your attorney petition the California DOJ, which is the California Department of Justice, and they will then re-tier you to a tier 1. So if you decide to settle the case, you need to be aware of the type of charge that you're pleading guilty to so that you can get yourself off the California registration in 10 years.
Is it possible for somebody accused of a sex crime to keep their case confidential, or is their name always going to be made public?
It's not that it's made public. I mean, it's not like it's made public. It's like the district attorney publicizes this case. They might publicize the case in the beginning saying, we arrested Mr. X on these types of charges, but you can't keep your name private when you're charged in a criminal case. Any kind of criminal case, really. I don't know of any procedure to keep the defendants, so-called defendants' names from the public.
Can you share an example of a case where evidence or lack of it made a huge difference in the outcome?
Well, like I said before, we had this child actually
Mhm.
who was a teenager when she testified, and she was testifying about what her father had done to her. I mean, there was a lot of other evidence in the case, but like I had said, when she was accusing my client of tying her to the bedpost, and then we had different witnesses come in and talk about the fact that there was no bedpost. She didn't have a bedpost. There was no beds in the house with bedposts. So how could he have tied her up to the bedpost?
Right.
So I've had lots of different cases like that where, daughters come in and talk about their fathers. It's it's a nasty business when you have a daughter coming in and talking about her father. But you should be, if it's a lie, normally with a little bit of investigation, you should be able to, hopefully, be able to show a jury the inconsistencies in their story. And either the inconsistencies are from what they've told police in the beginning to what they're saying now, to also being able to show through other witnesses that the accusations are they're not credible. Sometimes a victim will even, they will contact friends or other relatives and say something that hurts their case because they've said something inconsistent about what happened to a relative or a friend. And if you can find that person, then it hurts their case. It hurts the victim's case.
Well, wrapping up today's very touchy episode, it's a touchy topic, but what advice would you give to families who are supporting a loved one who is fighting a sex crime allegation?
You just have to stay strong for them because the unimaginable pressure that person feels, just the stigma that they feel being accused, the uncertainty about their future. And that's a lot. That's that's a lot of pressure because it's going to affect their employment. It could affect their freedom, and it can affect their standing within the community, and you just need to stay strong and for them and always be there. That's what you need to do.
Perfect. Well, that's enough for today's episode. Thank you, Robert, for all of your insights. And thank you for listening to Criminal Law Unfiltered with Robert M. Helfend. Evidence and defense strategies are everything in these cases, and the right lawyer can change the outcome. If you or someone close to you is facing charges, visit robertmhelfend.com to schedule a consultation. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review if you found today's episode helpful. Thank you, Robert.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.